right? You've been doing the removals now since 1865. It hasn't worked, so stop doing it.
They're not stopping until we either go or we become one, as they insist that we sing about. And that's the goal of settler colonialism, though. It is to make us forget that we were ever Indigenous in the first place. And that's why blackfellas chant, always was, always will be, still here.
If you're causing trauma on 3 or 4 or 5 generations or 6 generations of families, where do you think the young people are going to end up today? And that trauma is because of the legislation.
My childhood wasn't one that I wanted to remember. About 6 or 7, I lost my mum. Not long after losing my mum, they found my father hanging in a car park. I remember for about 2 years, every night I would cry myself to sleep, having really bad nightmares and no one to comfort me. I didn't know who to talk to. I didn't know how to talk. Redfern was really in its peak in terms of like drugs and crime and violence. This was just after 2000. People, drinking and fighting, arguing. There was always police everywhere. My uncles were going in and out of jail. People around me taking drugs. We couldn't play on the grass in my community with no shoes on because there's dirty needles everywhere. Nobody came looking for me, man. Like, nobody was responsible for me. My parents were dead. My first experience of going to the boys' home, I was really frightened and scared. I didn't know what to expect. And because of the lifestyle that I lived, we'd be making them trips about 4 in the morning. I just got strip searched by the police before I went there. I expected that. I didn't expect 2 grown men to do it again. I wasn't ready for that. One of the worst experiences as a child, to make you take your clothes off in front of 2 strange men that you've never met before. And after being strip searched, they locked me away in the cell by myself.
When we start thinking about children's incarceration rates and we think of the child that's in that system, let's be aware of how the child got there in the first place. When they were screened and looked at, no one identified the trauma that this child had.
Nobody in there is equipped to work with our most vulnerable children.
The vast majority of children in the care system are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, but all the workers in the system are not Aboriginal people. The police and the people who make the decisions in the court, the people who make the laws are not Aboriginal people. It is reasonable to ask yourself if there is a level of systemic racism in that system.
Just pacing like he's in a cage.
Yeah, that's what the police say. They're like animals in those confined spaces.
An agitated Dylan Voller is seen pacing his tiny cell. He's threatened self-harm. Leaning against the wall, he's playing with a pack of cards. Watch what 3 guards do to him next.
No matter what the reason for them coming into that room, and no matter what the reason for them wanting him to take off his clothes or be naked or whatever the hell they were doing, what on earth do you think was going through that kid's mind?
And after Dylan Voller was stripped naked and he was in his gown, what do you see that young boy doing?
I see someone in great distress.
In 2016, the Northern Territory government introduced legislation to legalise something new: mechanical restraints for children. It's March 2015. The boy in the chair is Dylan Voller. Now 17, he's been taken to the adult prison. The guards strap him down tightly to a restraint chair, wrists and ankles, after the boy had threatened to harm himself. He's left like this, alone in a cell for almost 2 hours.
This young person is at risk of self-harm, and the response is, oh, well, this person now needs to be put into isolation, which is solitary, and they'll have somebody come and check on them every 10 to 15 minutes. Well, to be quite honest, as a medical response, that is not appropriate. If you're seriously worried about a young person's mental health and you're fearful of them committing suicide, then surely to goodness they need to be in sort of specialist medical care, not being locked up in isolation.
When the guards return, Dylan Voller is almost catatonic.
There we go. We look out. Yeah. So you're looking to spend the rest of your night. What's important? Not much fun, eh?
8 o'clock the next morning, around about, they announced this Royal Commission. So things happened really quick. People like Malcolm Turnbull understood what that meant, what that vision showed, and it was outrageous. And eventually I got appointed to the Royal Commission with Margaret White.
It also makes me wonder whether or not places like Don Dale in particular, detention centre, we talk about the recidivist cycle, and whether that was a part of that cycle or in fact the cause of that cycle, further brutalisation.
You caused it, you dog.
Children, those very vulnerable children. And I suspect that what we saw last night in itself was evidence that the correctional facility was in fact a part of the problem, not a part of the solution.
The interim report has said that the facilities currently at Dundale are not suitable. I do agree with that. I think that the money, instead of being put into a new centre, should be put into a community-based program where they should start up a work camp and stuff like that, and more training and skills for young people that really need to be incarcerated, and maybe take them out bush to break it in horses, stuff like that, instead of just putting them into a jail facility.
Royal Commissions have these powers with a notice to produce. They've got to give us everything. And then you read the stuff, you see the witnesses telling you straight up, I did go in and fill on these kids and tell them to suck my dick. A guard admitted that in front of us, Mind you, he couldn't deny it because it was on. We had the footage.
Which one of you boys want to suck my Go, come suck my
What about acting in the best interest of the child? The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Always a key one on that is to act in the best interest of the child. How can you say you're acting in the best interest of the child when you're locking them up? How can you say you're acting in the best interest of the child when you're taking them away from their parents? When we know the evidence tells us one of the most important parts of the best interest of the child is to be with their parents.
Inside the behavioural management unit, a 14-year-old boy is trying to get out of his tiny concrete cell. For 36 minutes, CCTV records the boy using a broken light fitting, trying again and again to open the door. One of the guards on duty this afternoon has forgotten to lock it. The boy has been kept in solitary confinement for 23.5 hours a day for 15 days straight. He's lost all sense of time and he's deeply distressed.
He'd been detained for days on end in an isolation cell that had no natural light. He hadn't been outside. He was treated worse than an animal. And I don't care how much damage he caused. I'd say good on him, because I don't think anybody else would have behaved any differently.
How prison management responded beggars belief.
Go over the fucking gas. Fucking gas and food fucking. We're going to wait for it.
This is the sound of 6 children being tear-gassed at close range. Gassed for up to 8 minutes. The boys are shackled, dragged outside and sprayed with a fire hose.
That's whatever matter got breathe.
The racism, the hypocrisy, so they're in there to maintain order for these kids who've broken laws. And when we said to them, the law here says you can only detain these kids in isolation for 72 hours, and if that boy with the riot, you break the law. This isn't a regulation or a set of guidelines. This is, the law says this. I still reckon in any other country, the Northern Territory would be declared a failed state for what they did up there. We handed over to the Chief Minister and Nigel Scullion. 2 hours later, we had this event in Parliament House. They come out and said, we're going to do 2 things. We're going to demolish Don Dale and we're going to raise the age of criminal responsibility to 12 from 10. And they made that commitment. We made them recommendations. They made the commitment on the same day we handed it, and neither of those things have happened.
The frustration is that too many of the people that are involved in all of this justice system, whether it comes from the police through to the courts, to the lawyers, the legal representatives, even the magistrates and the judges, all still seem to be operating on a business as usual basis despite this Royal Commission. It's a matter of when, not if, something else will blow and erupt again. You know, we already had one riot from a young person who snatched some keys from a security officer, broke out. He and a bunch of other kids then set fire to the detention facility. I think it was just truly shocking. It was graphic, mind-boggling. The fact that we had our own version of Guantanamo Bay in a youth detention centre here is just beyond belief. It was staggering. Now, that young lad had been in a high security wing, had not been out of that facility for almost a month. That was his explanation as to why he did what he did. He'd had enough. He'd not been outside. Feet hadn't touched grass, hadn't seen natural light. You know, you can't just keep warehousing and locking kids up like this and forever constraining them, thinking that somehow magically this will change their behaviour. It does nothing to help them.
Kids in the system, findings, reports, and wrong commissions. Number statistics when they're making decisions. Assess the risks and build another prison. Got a license for recovery understaffed. Positions need filling and they need another guard. Who's lighting their path when they're frightened in the dark. They can speak but it's understood that it's what they're running. You expect them to act when they get told they're no good. Standing there in line and you make them go laugh. False starts, everyone runs past and you tell them can't shut while they're choking on dust. Throw it up, have our name on the friends say they know it's us. I tell them where I'm at naked, follow me. Remember that their kids know they can't pay policy. I select the individual, separate from the family. Visits and interviews, maximum punishment. Rehab is minimal. Treat them like that, you just make them better criminal.
It's a disgrace because the people who are responsible bear no responsibility, they bear no accountability, and the people who are subjected to that, the victims of that, the blame's put on them. It's like you're 10 years old, you're 11 years old, you've committed that offence where you're going to, you know, this detention centre with no understanding and no recognition about what's happened to that person's family for the last 4 generations, and how everything that's happened has been out of their control because the government have intervened and impacted them in a negative way.
And clearly, incarcerating kids does not work because in the Northern Territory, 80% of our kids return back into detention within 12 months. They're not getting access to the kind of therapeutic services that they need that might actually help them manage and regulate their behaviour. Those kids are also not getting access to a decent education. We're warehousing them. We're just holding them there until they turn 16, 17, 18, open the door, let them out. They go on to commit similar sorts of offences and now, of course, progress to the adult prison.
I was a thief and I used to steal. I went to adult prison and I was around fraudsters, I was around gangsters, I was around drug dealers, I was around sex workers. I didn't know any of this stuff until I went to prison. Then that became my reality too.
In the Brisbane City Watch House, kids often outnumber adults. Here, they are being held alongside some of the state's most hardened adult criminals.
I know that we do not want those young people in the watch houses, and...
But is that a breach of human rights law, international law, state laws?
Well, we haven't introduced a human rights bill in Queensland yet.
We found 2,655 instances where the international standards, Queensland's own regulations, and the police's own regulations has been violated.
Most of those kids sitting out in the detention centres are subject to removal orders from the Department of Child Safety. So they've been removed from their families. The department has been made responsible for their care. It's the department who's responsible for finding them locations for bail. It's the department who's responsible for ensuring those kids get to school, get a meaningful education, get employed.